Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Olson, and I want to welcome you to the Jumpstart an Ecological Landscape Career webinar presented by the Permaculture Skills Center. We're going to talk about the proven step-by-step workflow from consultation to design, among so much more. So let's get going. So the first thing is, why are we here doing this? We are here because we want to create this everywhere. Water-filled landscapes, food production, habitat, beauty, soil building. We can create amazing, beautiful, functional landscapes out there that provide for humans and also support the environment. So that's what we're going to get into today. We have a jam-packed webinar filled with amazing content. I hope you are ready. And let's get going. So what are you going to learn today? You're going to learn about what makes a landscape ecological, the step-by-step consultation to design workflow, best practices for designing a garden or landscape ecologically, how to jumpstart a career in landscaping and or gardening, and tips for beginners and experienced professionals. We've got it all for you today, no matter your starting point. I'm going to share my secret method for getting paid to be mentored by masters. Stay tuned for that. And some of the biggest mistakes to avoid as a landscape professional. I've made them, and I don't want you to make them. So I'm going to share that with you. So you are in the right place if you're a landscape gardener. You want to make sure you're using ecologically sound practices. Maybe you want to start a career taking care of the land and doing what you love. Maybe you want to change careers and do something you feel great about, helping our environment. I know that's one of the things that really has driven me when I made my shift. And I talked to a lot of folks who are just not happy with their current work situation. They want to make that shift. They want to make that jump, and they want to do something that really helps our planet out. And ecological landscaping is a totally viable option for that. You already offer landscaping and gardening services, and you're losing your mind. I have lost my mind quite a few times in the process of building my business, and I found it again, and I also learned from my mistakes. And so I really want to share with you some things that you can do so you don't lose your mind, because the truth is you can make a really good living taking good care of the environment and not lose your mind. And I'm super passionate about this notion of creating an economy that restores the planet, and ecological landscaping is absolutely a viable option for that. A little bit about myself. I'm the founder of Permaculture Artisans, an ecological landscape contracting company. We've been in business since 2005, and we gross over $1 million per year. We are doing $1 million a year worth of ecological landscaping. So is it possible to build an economy around restoring the planet, restoring our environments? Yes, absolutely it is. And I'm here to share with you some of the recipe to do just that. I'm also the founder of the Permaculture Skills Center, a vocational training center offering a variety of educational programs, including the Ecological Landscaper Immersion, fondly called the ELI, and the Farm School. And I'll tell you a little bit about those a bit later. So I've been doing this since I was a kid. Since I was a teenager, really. So I've got over 20 years of practicing permaculture and ecological design. I'm really happy to be here to get to share with you a little bit about how we did that. I'm also an avid landscape reader, and I have a daily awareness practice. Every single day, if you spend time in nature, there's an opportunity to listen and observe to the interactions and the patterns that are happening in our environment all of the time. By those observations and that listening, that can really aid us in our ecological design effectiveness. I think it's a lifetime, multiple lifetimes worth of time to listen, understand, and connect with nature. And I really suggest you come up with some sort of practice to be in nature every day as well. It will really, really help you develop your ecological landscaping skills. I also am a family guy. I love my wife and kids. They're a really high priority for me. And I've been lucky enough over the last year to really shift my work patterns around so I could spend more time with my kids while they're still kids. They sure do grow up fast. So make sure you stay right to the end of this presentation. I want to give you immediate value. I want you to be able to take what you learn from here and go out and apply it right away. So for those of you that stay to the end, we're going to offer you a downloadable PDF of our project workflow template. So it's going to be some sort of infograph workflow that will give you the step-by-step process. You can have that in your hand. And you're going to get a downloadable version of all of these slides. You might be scrambling to take notes as we go through. And so don't worry, stay to the end. We'll send you all of these slides and you'll have everything for yourself and you can go through it at your own pace. And I'm also going to give you a client intake form you can use for your next project. So how's that for some cool bonuses to just get you off and running? So how did I become a professional ecological landscaper? It's worth sharing this story with you because some of the things that happened to me might relate to the situation that you're in. The first thing is that out of high school, I got really turned on by wanting to change the world. For me, it's always been about making a big impact. I wasn't drawn to go to college, and so what was I going to do? Well, I found permaculture. Permaculture design is an ecological design system that integrates our food, water, shelter, energy needs with the environment. So it's a way that we design human systems that actually regenerate, care for our ecosystems, and provide those basic needs that humans require. So I got really turned on by permaculture as a solution. Here's a picture of me, probably about 20 years old there, as part of the Great Garden Giveaway project that myself and a bunch of friends initiated. We actually had a organization we started. It was called Planting Earth Activation, the acronym there, PEA, or P as in the pea that you eat. What we did is we gave away gardens in our community. We would actually take a whole neighborhood, knock on the doors of all the neighbors who had lawns in their front yard, and then ask them if we could just give them a garden for free. And then over a weekend, we would do 6, 7, 8 gardens all in one weekend. We'd get all the materials donated and the plants and the seeds. We'd get a bunch of volunteers out there. And it was a really amazing way to build community, to transform lawns into ecological paradise, to get neighbors to connect with each other. And that was really what got me on my way. And through that process, I learned more and more about sort of what was happening on our planet, our ecosystems, the havoc that the current economic model was playing. And so through that learning, I became a bit of an activist. I would call myself an ecological activist. I traveled around the world following the global justice movement, sort of going head to head with some of the large corporate structures that create the agendas for agriculture and land use and water. And through that, I really became an educator because everywhere we went, it was like we wanted to share the solutions. You know, we don't just want to talk about what we don't want to have happen. What's the alternative to the system we have, and how do we build resilience in our communities? And so I became an educator. Here's a picture of me at a mobilization in San Francisco called Reclaim the Commons, where we set up this whole model ecological garden inside this building where all of us activists were sort of mobilized from. This became a big part of my identity back then, teaching, turning people on to solutions to things like privatized water and privatized seeds and, ways that communities can really be empowered to provide for their own basic needs. And yes, if you're looking at this picture, that is me wearing white socks and sandals. Don't you love my style there? Yeah, ever since I got married, I don't actually sport that style anymore. But I thought it was funny when I saw that. It's like, oh, that's right. The white sock sandal days, those were fun. So what happened to me? Years of doing this activist work, and I crashed. I crashed and burned really hard. In fact, just a few weeks after this picture, I had a major burnout. I spent 3 or 4 days in bed, was really emotionally distraught, really questioning the effectiveness of what I was doing. And a few months after that, I got really sick with a chronic nervous system disorder, and that's actually still persistent today. So everything I've done in the past 12 years really has come out of how to manage my physical condition with my mission in the world. So I couldn't travel anymore. I couldn't do the kind of activism that I had been doing, which was actually providing some sort of an income through the donations and fundraising we did as activists. And so what do I do now? What do I do now? I'm sick. I can't do the activist work. At the same time, I'm going through a metamorphosis. I was planning to get married, wanting to start a family and make this new shift in my life. Here's a picture of my beautiful family when my children were young and I had a bit more hair. And there's a picture of my beautiful wife. So how do I provide for this beautiful family and still take care of the world? This was a really big question I was asking myself during those days. So a professional landscaper is born. I had the skill sets and I decided to launch my first big project as a landscaper. Here it is. We had installed designed and installed 2 acres of market gardens. This is a half-acre lavender farm. And you can see we did some light terracing. It's heavily mulched. We planted the lavender on the slopes because they don't like a lot of water. And our clients actually harvest this lavender, turn it into essential oils, and sell those essential oils. And then another part of this project, we planted a citrus grove, which here in Northern California is pretty rare to have a microclimate where we can grow citrus really well. And this site happened to have a great microclimate for that. So we planted a citrus grove out, and our clients were also able to sell those to the local markets. So the other really cool thing was I was able to hire my friends, which in retrospect, I wouldn't really do nowadays with everything I've learned. But back then, that was a really great thing. It was the first time in my life I could call my friends up and say, hey, why don't you come work with me and we'll get you paid. And I really trusted them. We had a really great working rapport. And so it also made it really fun. It was the first time ever that I really made myself a living, where I provided a service for somebody, they paid me for that service, and then I was able to pay my rent, pay my bills, put food on the table, and start to feel what it's like to actually be a provider for myself and my community. I also learned how to operate equipment, which later on in my career ended up being a huge boon, not having to hire out to really expensive folks to do our equipment operating. We were able to scale our business pretty quickly once we were able to do our own equipment operating. And I got myself trained to do that on this first project. So let's talk about some of the mistakes I made so you can avoid making them. The first thing is what I paid my employees, which I think was about $15 an hour at that time, was the same amount that I charged my client. Okay, I paid my employees the same amount I charged my client. This is a huge mistake because there's a lot of non-billable work that goes in to keeping people on the job. There's scheduling and there's meetings and there's trainings and all kinds of things that you can't really charge the client for direct unless you build it into the hourly rate that you charge your client for your employees. So I wasn't able to recoup any of that time. Nobody was getting paid for any of that time. And this was a little bit before we were totally legit because I was young and just starting out and still learning sort of all the legal aspects of being a contractor. But in a legit business like the one I operate now, there's insurance, there's taxes, there's all kinds of non-billable overhead expenditures. And really the only really effective way to get those costs covered is you build that into the hourly rate you charge your clients. Okay. So that was one of the big mistakes I made there at the beginning. I also had very poor tracking. I couldn't tell you exactly how much this project cost. I couldn't tell you how long it took us to build each terrace or to plant each lavender plant because we had zero tracking. And the way that hurts us, I mean, it didn't really hurt the project itself because we were moving forward and getting it done. But later, when the next project comes around, I have no data, no way of knowing how long something takes. And this really affects your estimating. So the other thing is I had terrible estimating. Luckily, I had a really, really cool client who was really flexible and open, and they were getting an amazing deal. They probably got a $150,000 landscape for about $30,000. And so the estimating really hurt me more than it hurt them. But having really good estimating is pretty crucial to having happy clients, to making sure that you have the cash flow you need to keep your business afloat. And so tracking the work that you do so you understand what it takes to get something done so you can use that data in your estimating on the next time around is a really crucial part of this whole process of landscape contracting. We had none of that going on back then. Also had no projected completion time. I had no idea how long this was going to take. I couldn't say to my client, we'll be here 2 months. Again, our client was really cool, but a lot of clients, they're not going to stand for that. They want to know when you're going to be done. And of course, project creep sets in. things change, and even if you say it's going to take us 2 months, it may actually end up taking you 4 months in the end. But you want to set out that initial expectation, and then when you figure out that we're not going to be able to complete it by then you have a conversation with your client and you make a new expectation of when you do think it will be completed. But having no projected completion date does cause a lot of problems. Clients are generally, they're excited about having the work done. So for a while, there's kind of this honeymoon phase where it's really exciting to see people on the land doing work. But after a while, people want their life back. They want their land back. They don't necessarily want people 5 days a week on their site using their facilities. And so there is a bit of a burnout that can happen for clients if you're just, they thought maybe it was 3 months and now you've been there 10 months and you haven't communicated up front that was going to happen. So that's another great mistake to avoid. So what is the power and foundation of ecological landscaping? Why ecological landscaping? What is the potential that it has for you, for me, for our communities, and for our environment? So the first thing is we want to look at soil. And an ecological landscaping approach can help sequester carbon in the soil. We want to think about the soil as this carbon battery where it can really charge up and hold a lot of carbon. And of course, as most of us know, there's too much carbon dioxide right now in the atmosphere, which is driving our global warming crisis. Thus, getting that carbon out of the atmosphere, how do we get it out of the atmosphere and where do we put it? Well, the way we get it out of the atmosphere is through the process of photosynthesis, the chlorophyll molecule that is, trees, plants, grasslands, algae, all these green living organisms will bring that carbon, breathe it down out of the atmosphere, and then where do we put it? And in our terrestrial environments where we have soil is the best place to put that material, which of course gets there through the decomposition of plant matter. The other aspect is building soil organic matter. Just having organic matter in the soil has tons and tons of benefits. First off, it feeds the biology in the soil, and a biologically alive soil is the foundation for healthy plants. Disease-resistant, pest-resistant landscapes really require healthy soil, and healthy soil requires biology, and biological activity requires organic matter. So this is one of the things that a really well-designed and implemented ecological landscape will provide for the environment. And for us humans, what does it do? We can grow our food and our medicine. So we're actually talking about being producers here, turning all of our landscapes into production systems, or at least the ones close to where we live, turning them into production landscapes will save people money, will provide healthy food alternatives, and can also provide a lot of ready and usable herbal medicine for humans to consume. And ecological landscapes can really be a foundation for this kind of production. And we also enhance wildlife habitat. And of course, being able to provide flowers and protection and habitat systems for all kinds of wildlife, insects, birds, lizards, and amphibians. And, there's a diverse set of wildlife that when they're able to thrive in a landscape, there's all kinds of benefits that the landscape gets, like pest management, increased pollination, and so on. So every one of our ecological landscapes can provide this function at the very least. So let's keep going. What else? We can restore watersheds through our ecological landscaping. And this is a pretty huge deal because a lot of watersheds are really in peril due to the runoff patterns of our communities, right? Water runs off of roads and industrial agriculture and houses, and it carries with it all these pollutants and sediment, and it can really destroy watersheds. So one of the things our ecological landscapes can do is infiltrate that water, which, being here in California, we've been in a drought for the last few years. Having water in the landscape that actually adds to the resiliency and drought proofing of the system is really, really amazing. And so here you can see we've got some rain gardens and a little water harvesting swale there, and that water actually infiltrates into the ground. It's like the soil drinks it up and some of that water actually sticks around and is available for plants and trees to make use of. Now, people always, when they see a picture like this or they think about water infiltration, the first concern is mosquitoes. And you always want to know what your soil type is when you're designing these kinds of infiltration systems, because mosquitoes can definitely be an issue in clayey soils. If you have loamy or sandy soils, then it's unlikely that the water is going to sit around for more than 3 days. 3 days is the gestation period for mosquito larvae, and so that does not a big issue depending on your soils. But where you do have those hard pans or those clay soils, mosquitoes can be an issue, but that doesn't mean to avoid doing water infiltration systems, because there's a lot of different techniques that you can implement where you can actually create these infiltration systems and not have them be a mosquito issue. The other thing is that we manage erosion and sediment, okay? So water's running off of our surfaces. And what happens as water runs off of our surfaces is it's carrying all this pollution and sediment and all this stuff with it, and that actually washes into our creeks and rivers. Now, here being in salmon country, where we have coho salmon, which is an endangered species, been on the brink of extinction in this area for a while, sediment in the watershed is one of the major catastrophic things that happen, because salmon actually need clean gravel beds high up in the watershed in order to spawn. So if our development and surface water management practices increase the movement of sediment and pollution into our creeks, rivers, and streams, then we actually are destroying our salmon habitat. And of course, they're actually a keystone species, so they have a cascading effect throughout the entire ecosystem when they go. So we can actually put in things like this permeable dam. This is a gabion here, where water runs into it. And the thing about it is, one of the major ways that we get erosion is because of the velocity of water, how fast the water is moving. It turns into this scouring drill that's actually like digging away the soil because it's moving so fast. So if we can intercept that and take the energy out of the water, so we slow it down, it won't be so destructive. But keep in mind, like I said, this is a percolation dam, so water can still seep through. This isn't a pond dam. We're not trying to keep the water back forever. We're just trying to slow it down. And of course, when water slows, if it is carrying sediment and other material in it, that stuff actually deposits. So you can actually capture that material before it moves down into the watershed. And every one of our ecological landscapes can provide some function like this. It doesn't have to be a gabion like the picture, or brush check dam sometimes we use. It doesn't even have to be that either. It can even just be strategic planting systems. But this is definitely one of the great functions that an ecological landscape can provide. Watershed buffers is another aspect. An entire ecological landscape is like this huge watershed buffer. So beyond things like erosion and sediment control, there's pollution. There's also just protecting the edges of our watersheds, right? Where riparian organisms like amphibians and birds and other organisms like that kind of live in these edge systems between land and water, where they can really thrive and have what they need. And so every one of our landscapes can be a sort of watershed buffer in this way. And also, these landscapes are like water filtration systems. So as water does move through the system, it's actually being cleaned by roots and beneficial bacteria, and by the time the water actually gets into our waterways, we want that water to be super clean. So what else? Ecological landscapes help people, and this is a really key factor. Often in the sort of more conservationist environmental movement, we really focus on the health of the environment, but don't really see people as part of that. But ecological landscaping actually does put people, and permaculture puts people into that view about what are we trying to do. And of course, reconnecting to nature is one of the big benefits of an ecological landscape. The more people are in nature, the more calm we feel. It helps reduce our stress. We can, really experience the awe and beauty of our natural environment, which then gives us more of an appreciation for it. And the more people that have an appreciation for nature, the more likely folks are going to make the kinds of decisions that will keep our environment really healthy and regenerative. And it provides meaningful career opportunities. And that's probably why a lot of you are here today, is this goal of actually doing something good for the planet and getting your needs met. And this is a picture of the team, Permaculture Artisans, my contracting company, and Permaculture Skill Center, the vocational training school. Every one of these people are making a living by restoring the planet. I mean, imagine that. What if we all made a living by doing good things for our environment, for each other? And of course, earlier we talked about how we can grow food and medicine and all these other yields that ecological landscapes can have for people. 3 critical steps to jumpstart a career in ecological landscaping. So here are 3 foundational things you want to do. So first off, you want to establish your credibility. People aren't going to want to hire you if they don't feel like you have something to offer them. So how do you establish your credibility? We're going to get into that. And the consultation workflow, step-by-step workflow, so that your consultations are effective and you build relationship with the clients. And we're going to get into that. And then a great design process. So how do you implement a great design process and communicate well with the client and make sure that that goes off with resounding success? So let's get into this. Establish your credibility. So the first thing you want to do is build a portfolio. If you're just starting out and you haven't worked on any projects or done any designs and you don't have anything you think could be in a portfolio, then the place to start is to just pick one project somewhere. It could be your house, it could be your parents' house, it could be a friend, a neighbor, and set up a model landscape. It doesn't have to be very big. It can be, a small urban type thing, but make sure that in your model landscape, you have a little bit of everything in there. You're growing some food, you're enhancing some wildlife, you've got some sort of surface water management system in there, and make sure it's beautiful and well taken care of. And then go take pictures of different aspects of that and start to build a portfolio that way. The first garden that I ever installed was a real magnet for potential clients. I wasn't taking a lot of clients at that time, but I did a lot of tours and classes in that first garden, and it really turned people on and established my credibility in the community, and that really led to a lot of opportunity. So I highly, highly suggest you pick one project, no matter what the scale, and do it really, really well. And then you can build a portfolio. Here's the portfolio we have at Permaculture Artisans. It's a book that goes through a series of different projects that sort of has photo documentation of them. We also have a portfolio gallery on our website. Of course, that's a great place to land clients, is to have a robust website that has a lot of educational language in it, that talks about the services that you provide and has pictures of what you've done. That's another way to build a portfolio, is to do it through a website. But what's nice about having something in a book, even if it's just a one-page flyer, which I used to have just a one-page, cardstock flyer that had some pictures and had a bunch of information. It just shows that you have put your energy in to show up professionally and that you're taking time to communicate what your services are and why they might benefit somebody. So as part of that, anytime you want to establish your credibility, whether it's through a portfolio, it's giving a tour of a garden, or it's even being on a consultation, you want to educate and inspire them. Something that is really passionate to you. Maybe you're really passionate about monarch butterflies. Maybe you're really excited about a strawberry variety. What really excites you and turns you on in this work, and share that little bit of passion with your clients, and they will really feel how excited you are. They'll get turned on by it, and they're more likely to want to work with you. Also, know what you don't know. This is really key. You don't want to get yourself in over your head by making promises you can't keep. You really show your integrity by telling somebody you don't know something, saying they ask you a question about this or that and say, that's not something that I have learned yet. And even though it may seem like you're shooting yourself in the foot to tell someone you don't know something, it actually makes the education and inspiration you do share with them more integral, because they know that you're only going to share with them things that you feel really confident about. And don't worry about losing clients because you can't do something. We're going to get into this a little bit later, sort of a secret tip about something that you can do to get the clients, even if you don't have that knowledge base. And that really has to do with working with other professionals. We'll get into talking more about that later. So know what you don't know, and then choose the right scope. What can you actually accomplish? Don't tell someone you're going to design them a 5-acre market farm if you really can't do that. Again, we'll talk about how you bring in professionals so you can scale things up, but make sure you choose a scope that you can actually accomplish, because there's nothing worse than getting yourself in on a project that you actually aren't qualified for, or you haven't set the right team up to accomplish the project in a good way, and then have a totally failed project. That's really going to hurt you in terms of the word of mouth marketing, which is really the best marketing you can have, is word of mouth. And that's why having a portfolio, educating, inspiring people, making sure people know how integral you are, is really important. So choose a scope that is manageable for you. And I just want to say just one more thing on that is, go ahead and push your edges. That doesn't mean always make everything easy for yourself, because you're going to grow and your learning edges are going to be really powerful when you sort of push what's possible. Just don't go overboard in that, and make sure you have a really robust team backing you up no matter what you do. So like I said before, start with one project and do it really, really well. One really, really well done project is going to be the basis for your entire credibility. And a lot of projects I've done, which I've just kind of built my career on before I actually had a landscape career, were projects that I did volunteer for, say, the Planting Earth Activation organization I talked about earlier, or my own gardens. Nobody paid me to do it. So it's actually can be worth it to invest some of your own time and energy to create something that's done really, really well, and use that as a way to get clients. And then invite experienced professionals to your projects. I really can't say this enough, because especially if you're starting out, you might have a long ways to go to learn about design and installation and such. And inviting experienced professionals to back you up, to give you consultation, to jump in and do things you can't do, can really create a sense of professionalism with your clients, and you're actually going to learn a lot. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. So let's get into the proven consultation workflow step by step. We've talked a bit about establishing your credibility, and that's really the first thing you want to do. So now the consultation workflow step by step. Here are the steps we're going to take you through: setting up the consult and the expectations, prepping for the consult, doing the pre-site site visit research, then actually doing the consultation. We're going to really get you set up on how to knock that one out of the park. Again, educate and inspire, an important part of the consultation. The proposed design process to the client. This is really where you're sort of making your sale after you finish the consultation. What's the next step? How are you going to follow up, right? So identifying the next steps, whether it's a design process or it's a report, we'll talk about that. So let's get into this here. There's the follow-up there. So setting up the consultation and the expectations. Really, really key out the gate that you establish a clear set of expectations. How long are you going to be there? That's the first expectation you want to set. I would suggest having at least an hour and a half. 2 hours seem to be a pretty ideal first consultation time frame, because you don't get too burnt out, the client doesn't get too overwhelmed, but you're able to have a lot of opportunity to assess the situation, assess the client and all that, and give suggestions. So be clear on the time frame. Now, of course, the scope of the project will affect how long you do a consultation for. If it's a small urban lot and it's 10 by 12 feet, just a little small area, maybe an hour is sufficient to sit and talk about it. But remember that the consultation is not just about coming up with design ideas or looking at the landscape. It's also about building relationship with the client. So I would really, if possible, stick to that hour and a half minimum, just as an opportunity to build relationship with the client. So your first client intake, usually we do this before we ever even show up. We get a little intake form here, the name, address, all the contact information. So that's their email, their phone numbers. And then you ask them a little bit about their goals and the desired outcomes. You want to be able to show up on site with this kind of stuff already out of the way. You don't want to be wasting a lot of your consultation time doing this really simple information gathering. And by getting a sense of goals and desired outcomes, sometimes a client might hold back a little bit before they meet you. So, take it with a grain of salt, whatever you get from the goals and desired outcomes before you show up on site. They might want to vet you a little bit before they really tell you what they want to do, but having some sense of what they're after will help you set yourself up for success so that when you show up, it's like you already know that they want to plant an orchard and grow fruit trees or have a food forest. So maybe you show up and maybe you bring them a basket of pineapple guavas that you just harvested or something, because you know that they're really into rare fruits. So having a little bit of a sense of what their goals and desired outcomes are will really aid you in showing up well prepared, ready to give them what they want. And like I said before, be so clear with the expectations of this first consult. Let me just say that a first consultation is not a design phase. I repeat, the first consultation is not the design phase. Your first consultation is about gathering data, asking questions, understanding the client, understanding the site. It's not the place where you want to make sure you set up with the client that they're not going to have a design created for them because you spent 2 hours on the site. That's just not realistic. Yeah, but not all clients are going to know that up front. So you don't need to say, I'm going to show up for a consult and it's not a design. You don't need to tell them that, but you can just set the expectations and say, here's how the first consult usually goes. It's a time for us to build relationship, for me to get a sense of your goals, your outcomes, to observe the site, see what the resources and constraints are, and then we go from there. That's a good way to set up the expectations for the project. So let's get into some of that pre-consult site research. And again, if you want to knock the consult out of the park, this is the kind of thing that you do. You take some time to really prep yourself and get an understanding of the site before you show up. So the first thing you can do is go to Google Earth, get a Google Earth image. I like to print one out. This is an image of the Permaculture Skills Center where we operate our vocational training schools. And this is a couple years ago, so it looks actually quite different than that now. Look at the Google Earth image. You get so much information just by checking out this image. You get a sense of how many buildings are on site. You get a sense of the access ways and the parking. You might wonder, what are the brown areas? What are the green areas? What does all this mean? Is there a little farm down there with those nice curved rows? What's going on there? You can ask yourself these questions. Oh, there's a solar system there already, so I know they're on solar. Having that information ahead of time before you ever show up on site will just really help you be effective when you're actually on the consult. And if you can, and this is optional at the beginning, but again, if you really want to knock it out of the park, look at a topo map. I don't have one of this right here now, but there's some readily available information online. USGS has a free topography of the United States, and those are at, I think, 20 or 40 foot intervals. So if you're in a small flat property, it's not going to provide you too much information. But if you're looking at a larger site, that can be really effective. Some counties and cities actually have 1 foot topography all generated for you already through using LiDAR. And so just look around, see if you can get access to some topography. You might even ask the client if they already have a topo map that they can send you ahead of time before you show up. And by getting a sense of topography, you're already going to start observing valleys and ridges and water flow patterns, and before you ever show up on the site, you're going to have some markers in your mind around what are some different things that you definitely want to make sure you see, because you looked at the topo map and it looked like there was a big flat ridge over in this one spot, and maybe that's a good place for the orchard, and so you already have that information before you show up. So topography is key. It's definitely not mandatory at this phase, but will definitely help you. And then soils, you already have access, especially if you're in the United States, you have access to all the soils of your client, and you can go to the NRCS. Is actually USGS generated information here. You go to NRCS Soil Web Survey, or it's a Web Soil Survey, sorry, and you can zoom into these different areas. You can put in the address of the site, and you can actually get a ton of information about the soils before you ever show up. You can get a sense if there's clay, loam, sand. You can get a sense of the erosiveness of it, the topography, and all kinds of, is there a hard pan there? All kinds of really key information that having that before you show up is really going to help you a lot. But I will say this, even if you get all of that great information, you also just be aware that there's nothing like being on the ground and checking the soil out for yourself with your own eyes. Even checking out the soil data before you go isn't going to give you everything you're going to need to know about that soil. So use that information to give you a jump start, but don't depend on it 100%, because there's nothing like actual site observation. There's so much diversity out there, especially with soils, that you really want to take that time to do the on-site testing as well later on in the process. And then watershed implications. Here in Northern California, like I had mentioned before, we've got endangered salmon, and California being in the drought, there's actually some government oversight around a lot of watersheds, and that will really affect what a client can do on their property, whether they can build, whether the kind of agriculture they can do, how close to the stream are they. That brings up a bunch of issues. So understand the watershed implications of the site before you show up. And there's nothing like showing up and providing that bit of professional oversight to a client when they make a suggestion that is really unrealistic relative to what you know about the watershed. And you can say, oh, hey, look, you're in this particular watershed, and I don't know if you knew this drought restriction is in place here, or there's endangered coho salmon down there in that creek, and that means that we can't do this or that. And that will really also show your credibility to the client and help you move forward in the design process in a way that's really in line with all the aspects of the site, really doing your due diligence before you show up. And then zoning, and this is totally optional, but it will come into play at some point on many projects. What is the actual zoning of the property? That could be from the city. You can find that out if you're in a city limits, and go down to the planning department and find out the zoning. Or if you're in the county, then the county would have that information. But zoning is really all the restrictions that are imposed upon a site. Say at the Permaculture Skill Center, we're zoned residential agriculture, and there's a whole set of things that we can do. There's a set of things that we can't do. Having that information going in, with our eyes open, really helps us to make good decisions about our development as we move forward. So this is a bit of your pre-consult site research. Now, I'm not saying you have to do any of this stuff. There's not a mandatory that you have to do it. I've shown up on plenty of consults without doing any of this because I just didn't have the time and still had a great consult. But I'll just say that the times when I did do this pre-consult site research, showing up with that Google Earth image, I pretty much do that every time at the very least, really shows that credibility to the client. It really makes your consultation way, way more effective because you already have all this information and data driving your observation and your assessment of the site, and really yields great results if you do it this way. So actually doing the consultation. So you did all that, you've got the consultation set up, you've created your expectations, you've done all your pre-consultation site research, and now you're showing up the big day. The first thing is be punctual. Showing up late to a scheduled meeting with a client is not going to go off very well, especially if it's the first impression. Now, of course, situations can happen, things can come up that'll make you late. If something comes up, absolutely 100%, you have to call them as soon as you know you're going to be late. That could be what saves the client for you, is if you're going to be late, call them, let them know what's up. They're really, really going to appreciate it. You got to understand that a lot of your clients might be busy people too, and they're trying to fit you into their own schedules. And the other thing is appearance. This is a funny mistake that I made for a long time, just kind of growing up in a sort of, I want to say almost a hippie-ish sort of community, and not paying a lot of attention to my appearance, like taking showers or or the clothes I was wearing or whatnot. And one time, I'll just tell a real quick story. One time I had this opportunity to go meet with this general contractor who had a bunch of projects, a bunch of winery projects that wanted to start doing ecological stewardship. And he thought maybe I would be a good match. And it actually was a mutual friend who was introducing me to this contractor. So I go to this meeting and I show up and I'm wearing my wool jacket, which I just love, but it's this green, dark green, really, really furry wool jacket. And I show up to this meeting with this general contractor and his team, and they're all wearing button-up shirts and such. They all look really dapper. And the first thing somebody says, just as soon as I walk in, sit down to the meeting, one of the members of the team looks over at me and says, "Hey, that's a cool jacket. Can you smoke that thing?" And everybody laughed, and I just knew right there in that moment, oh, my credibility's lost just because of the jacket I wore. They've already judged me, and needless to say, I didn't end up building that relationship very well, and the meeting didn't go great. And so I learned from that experience, though, that showing up in a way where you're not necessarily going to trigger a lot of judgment might be an approach that will yield you a more diverse set of clients. And I mean, that's totally up to you, and doesn't mean that you can't attract clients that don't care about your appearance. But if you do put a little bit of energy into that, I guarantee you're going to have more success in converting clients. So setting the agenda. So this is part of the expectations that you'll set with the clients. And so you really want to set this agenda in a way where they know that at the beginning of the consultation, you're not going to be giving a lot of suggestions. I really, really suggest that you spend the first half of the consultation being the detective, using leading questions as a way to gather input on your client and on the land. So what does it mean to be a detective? It's like you're gathering evidence, you're gathering data, you're really coming in with awareness about all the different patterns and relationships and things that are going on the site and with the client, and really attune yourself to even the small patterns, because those things might be really important later. If you show up as the expert and before you even hear the client out, before you even have a chance to walk on the site, you're already spitting all this knowledge, all this, I know this and I know that, and here's what you should do, and here's what I suggest. The problem with that approach, some folks do it and they may feel like, hey, I'm the authority, I'm going to show them I'm the authority. But the problem with that is you could really stick your foot in your mouth, because you might make some suggestions that don't actually match up with the site. And the client is always going to know more about the site at the beginning than you are, because most likely they've lived there or they've had time to observe the site. So you don't want to stick your foot in your mouth at the beginning by just spitting off all kinds of suggestions and claiming your authority, because you might really overwhelm the client before they even have a chance to share with you what their vision is or what their constraints are. And without seeing the land itself, it's really premature to be giving too many suggestions. So when you set the agenda, I always tell clients up front, hey, the first hour, I'm just listening. I'm listening to you. I'm listening to the land. I'm taking it all in. And by the end of the consultation, I'll definitely be giving you some suggestions. So they know that they're going to get something, and their expectation is that you're going to take some time before you do that. Moving right along here, again, make connections. Small things matter. Talk to the children, pet the animals. I mean, these are little relationship building tips that really help that client feel comfortable with you. You don't want to come in and be the super awkward consultant who is totally oblivious to the fact that your client has a life and there's things that they care about. And so, take that time to make those small connections so they kind of feel like, more comfortable with you, and maybe that you're sort of part of the family almost. And a lot of my clients that I really spent a lot of time with in some of the bigger projects, it is like family. We are like family. They'll invite me over to dinner, I'll hang out in their house, and we'll talk like old friends. And that's a beautiful kind of relationship to set up. It takes time to do that, but it really starts with these small things, these little connections you can make. And then when you're on the site, the whole game, this is all about being the detective. It's the site assessment approach, and you observe. Get out of your own mind. Try not to think about design. Try not to think about what you would do here or there. Just observe. Look at the patterns of water. Put your hand in the soil. Dig a hole. Check out the animals. Listen for the hawks. Listen for the birds. Really pay attention to plants and plant indicators. Get a sense of the climate and the microclimates, and so on and so on and so on and so on. I can't stress enough how vital it is that you take this first consultation, you take some time to really, really get to know all of the patterns and interactions and relationships happening on the site. This is what you're going to build your design off of later, and it's what's going to show you the resources and constraints of the site so that you don't make really big mistakes later on. And then when are you going to provide suggestions? Near the end, once you've done all your leading questions, you've had that big client intake, you know about their goals, their dreams, you've learned about them as people, you've had time to observe the site, observe the patterns. Now's the time to make suggestions. And hopefully over that hour or hour and a half, whatever it took you to get to this point, you've been filing away either on your notepad, if you have a notepad with you, or you're writing right directly on that Google Earth image that you have with you. You're writing notes, you're circling areas, you're asking questions and writing it all down during your observation and listening phase. And then you can reflect suggestions back to the client. You can say, I noticed that really big erosion gully over there. It looks like it's dumping a lot of sediment into your pond, and I'm concerned about that. Or you can say, it looks like your road's going to be washed out in the next few years because of this drainage issue over here. You can make suggestions once you've had that time to really do the observation. Now let's get into some of the design process and next steps. This is what you're going to do in that last 15 minutes of the consultation, is really set up the next steps. Now, if you don't do this at the end of the consultation, because sometimes you need a little time to really percolate with everything, that's totally fine too. And that might even be more ideal, is to let the client know, hey, I'm going to get back to you with a little outline of what I think are the right next steps. I really want to get my thoughts in order and write you a little report. And that'll lead us on to the next steps. I really suggest doing that if that feels appropriate for you and your client. That gives you time to really curate what those next steps are going to be. And one of the first things you want to understand is, what is the scope of the project? And hopefully you've asked enough leading questions and made enough observations that by the time you're done with the consult, you have an idea of a scope, or you have an idea of multiple different scopes. And when you get back to them with your simple report outline, you ask more questions and say, well, here's 3 options of how I see I can move forward depending on what you want to do. Here's 3 different scopes. Let's clarify this before we move on to the next thing. And then what are the expected deliverables? So in this process, now you're really honing in on the actual next steps. Is it a design plan? Is it a consultation report? Is it a base map? What are the exact deliverables? Be super clear with that, have an agreement. And if it's a design plan or a base map, then actually the next step isn't to produce the design plan or the base map. The next step is to produce a proposal for a design plan or a base map, so that you're super clear on how much these things are going to cost. So you produce a proposal. Once the client approves that, then you can actually get to doing the work. And then one thing that I see time and time again folks do, and I'm not totally sure why, is not include some of the most important elements the client is asking for. So even if they're things that you're not terribly passionate about, if the client says, I really want a bocce ball court, that we want to play bocce ball. A lot of you probably call it bocce, but I have Italian family, so we call it bocce. So maybe bocce ball court might be something a client wants, and maybe for you it's like, oh, a bocce ball court. Well, that's not really something I'm super excited about. I'm excited about these other things. Well, that doesn't really matter. If the client really wants that, you make sure you include that in the design plan. Otherwise, you're not a good match for them. And you have to ask yourself the question of, well, am I willing to design and potentially implement something that I'm not super excited about? And that's totally up to you. In most cases, if you are an ecological landscaper and you're hired out to a project, there's a lot of features in that project that you will be really excited about. There will be a food forest or a water harvesting system or something, and there'll be that bocce ball court. So you get to decide whether it's a good match for you, but just make sure you include all those really important features that the client's been asking for in your plan. So design process and next steps. Okay, we're just continuing here. What were the resources and constraints of the site during your observation? And when we say resource, you always want to think about the client's budget, and during the design process is the appropriate time to start asking them about their budget. Now, even if you're only doing design and you're not even expecting to install any of this stuff, they probably are going to want to install it later. So you have a choice here to talk to them about their installation budget a little bit, because sometimes what can happen is kind of one of the big mistakes to avoid is you design something that the client just really can't afford to build. Most of the time, clients don't have a good sense of what things cost. They might be throwing all their visions and dreams at you. They don't know what things are going to cost. And then you say, oh, here's all their visions and dreams. Great. I'm going to create this really great design for them. They're going to be so happy. And then you make the design, they love it, and they get some estimates and find out that it's hundreds of thousands of dollars more expensive than they thought it was going to be. And they can actually only implement a tiny fraction of the design. And now all of a sudden they're blaming you for designing them something that they can't afford. So having a conversation about affordability is key, and knowing that there's different kinds of designs. I prefer to work clients towards a long-term design. And so what I mean by that is we're going to create a design for you that might take you 20, 30, 40, 50 years even to implement. We're looking long-term here. This is 7-generation thinking. The budget doesn't really matter. If you can create that sort of expectation, then great. Just make sure you have that communication with the client. And then when they go to install, they're just going to piece it out little by little, year by year, decade by decade. They're going to implement what they can afford to do and prioritize it. Now, if you are working in that kind of a design frame, then help your client with priorities, because often the clients don't know in terms of sort of economy of scale of what might be worth starting with or not. So if you're doing that kind of design, then also plan to do a bit of a phase development timeline along with your design so that the client really gets good value and understands how to take the project on after design. Now, the other way to do it is just to design something that they can afford to build right away. That's pretty commonplace that clients, I only have $10,000. That's all I have. I want to get the best possible value for $10,000. And so you're not going to design them a bunch of dry stacked rock walls and architectural trellises and breezeways and stuff, because that's going to blow the budget. You're going to go with more simple. You're going to get them exactly what they want functionality wise, if they want to grow food or they just want it to be drought tolerant or whatnot, and you achieve that within their budget, and that's what you design for. So really be clear on that. And then you're always going to need a base map. If you're doing a design plan like the picture on the left there, you're always going to be doing some sort of base map. So sometimes the client may already have a base map, and a base map is of the existing site. So it shows where the structures are, and it shows where the roads are, and it shows topography. Almost always we have base maps. If the project is big enough, we're almost always going to want to get some topographical layer on there. There's mapping companies that you can hire to help get a base map, and that's probably what we do about 90% of the time with our clients is we outsource base map creation to another company. I happen to co-own a digital mapping company called Foresight Mapping LLC. So now we provide that service for our clients. But engineers are going to do that. Surveyors are going to do that. There's a lot of different professionals out there that can create a base map. And like I said before, in some cases, a client is already going to have a bit of a base map. So make sure you get that base map. So that way, when you do your design mapping and your design plan, that it's actually to scale and actually meets the requirements of a real design plan when people go to install it. Then the other aspect is the ecological considerations of the site. Sometimes a client wants to do A, B, and C, right? They have an idea of what they want to do, but from your ecological understanding or your observations, you know that doing A, B, and C is going to pollute the watershed, or it's going to eradicate a rare plant that's on site, or it's taking out the tree, the only tree that has the red-tailed hawk nest in it. These are the kinds of things they're hiring you for, to be able to make those ecological observations and help coach them through what they want to do so that they have the least detrimental impact on the ecology and the best regenerative, supportive impact on the ecology. You go through all this, you make your design, and I'll just say there's so much more. I'm really wanting to pack in a lot of information into this webinar, but every one of these topics could be days, weeks, months of training. So I'm going to give you an opportunity later on how to take some next steps to really get yourself trained up and get the support you need. With the design process, just know there's a lot more to it than that, but I just wanted to kind of skim over at least the workflow. That's what we're really talking about now, is at least the workflow for how you move from one part of the workflow to the other. Once you've actually done the design and figured all of that out, you have the deliverable. Now you're into presentation, and presentation is a critical part of any design process. Here's the presentation flow. The first thing you want to set up with your client is that you want to present the whole plan before taking a bunch of feedback from them. Set that expectation out at the beginning. Just say, okay, I really want to share the design for you. If you would, just sort of hold too many questions or feedback just till we get through the end, and then we can totally get into all the feedback stuff. Now, clarifying questions are okay if they're lost, if they're just totally lost at one part of the presentation. You want to get them on the same page with you. So definitely make room for clarifying questions, but try to hold them back from making sweeping judgments of the design plan till you're done, because you may have solved a problem for them in a way that's really creative that they just can't see it, or they look at the map and they think, oh, I don't know how they're solving that drainage problem by looking at the map, and maybe it's something you get to at the end. You want to make sure you have a chance to really show them how you solved all their problems before they throw you under the bus and think, oh gosh, this design didn't really meet my expectations. Start with presenting the plan. Don't take too much feedback until you get through the whole thing. Clarifying questions are okay. And then after you've done the main presentation, now go for the feedback. Just when you show up for the presentation, you want to have printed versions of your design plan. And often we'll do a 24-inch by 36-inch version, so it's really easy to see and it's really big, and you're going to leave them a copy. And then we'll also have an 11 by 17 version. It's a little smaller and something that everybody can be looking at. So if there's a few different clients, it's a couple, or it's you and some other professionals you're working with, like an architect and a client, everybody has a map they can be looking at. And then during the feedback phase, don't be shy. Pull out a red pen and just write all over that map, right? Put it right on the map, the things, the issues that are having, the questions that are having, the revisions that need to be made. Know that the first time you present a plan, it's a draft. you're almost never going to knock it out of the park on the first version of the plan. You're definitely going to want to be doing a revision. Get that red pen out and redline that. Don't be afraid to get the feedback. Support the client in knowing that you're happy to make changes. If they're really pushing back on things that affect the ecological functions of the design, like you've really made this or that observation and you know that you have to put the chicken coop in a certain spot to avoid a smell issue with the neighbors or something like that, let them know why you chose to put things where because of these ecological considerations that you're coming in with. That's why they hired you, even though it might not be their ideal preference. They're going to trust you. If you've gone through this workflow exactly the way I've laid it out for you, by the time you get to this point, you will have built a ton of trust with the client, and they should take in what you've designed for them and in a really good way. And if you've done all your observation and your research and you've really vetted the client and asked all those leading questions, then you should really be at a good place in this first draft. But there's always going to be some revisions. So avoid this mistake. Have a revision plan. Not having a revision plan is really going to get you in trouble because, like I said, you're always going to need to make some revisions. And if in your design proposal, you only put in enough time to do one version of the plan, then you're going to get into a really awkward place after the presentation when the client says, well, this or that needs to be changed or whatnot. Now you're going to have to talk about money again, or you're going to be volunteering your time. So make sure that when you do your design proposal, between consultation and actually doing the design, you're going to have that design proposal phase. Make sure that you include at least one revision period where you present the plan, you get feedback, and then you have the revision. And I would say multiple revision check-ins are really beneficial. And what I mean by that is, even when you're doing that first drafted plan, go ahead and just send over. If you're unclear about something, you're kind of stuck and you're not sure if the client would want this or that approach, go ahead and send it over and say, hey, I'm going in this direction with the pathways. What do you think? Get feedback from your client as often as you feel like you can do it in a way that fits your budget so that you're not wasting your time doing too many revisions. So plan that out ahead of time and get as much feedback as you can through the process so that by the time you do present them with a sort of final plan, it's as close to a finished product as possible. And then also, with the expectation, do you have a design report? Do you have construction notes? Are these aspects that are expected with the design? When you're setting up the design proposal and starting this whole process, get really clear on whether you're just giving them a map with your concept plan on it, or you're going to write out and educate them about the different pieces and parts of it. Or for what landscape architects do is they actually do detailed construction notes so that the client can hire a contractor and just give them the design with all the construction notes, and the contractor can build right off of the plan that way. But that's a very advanced level, doing construction notes, and not something that I'm going to really advise, especially folks starting out, to do. I think a design report can check a lot of boxes in terms of sharing more information without getting too detailed with construction notes. So a design report might just affirm a little bit why you chose to do this or that. Here's why we put the chicken coop in where we did, and you just write a little note about that. Here are the varieties of trees that we planted. You have a little spreadsheet with the different plants, and that might be a planting plan. Know how many different aspects of the design. There's so many layers we just haven't even had time to get into in terms of design and design process. So I'm just really skimming the surface here, but I just want you to know about these different parts and pieces and where they may fit in to setting up your project right. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next piece here. And I hope that you got a ton of value out of that workflow. If you have questions, certainly send us your questions. We're going to have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation here, so we'll get to some of your questions. But I want to share with you my secret method for getting paid to be trained by masters. So even if you don't have a ton of experience in ecological landscaping, If you have organizational skills, you can be incredibly successful right from the start. It all comes down to organizing other professionals. You start by hiring them for consultation. So, for instance, if I'm on a project and we know we want to build a huge pond, well, I will put into the design proposal, I will put time in to have an engineer out for a consultation. Uh, Going to the next step of hiring the engineer to actually design the pond dam, that might be a next phase, but I will for sure have them out for a consultation, and I'll build that into the design proposal. That's just one example. It could be having an electrician out to help you with the landscape lighting situation. It could be having an arborist out to look at tree hazard. Any of those things, you can hire them out and have them come out and consult for you. But the beautiful thing is, if you set this up correctly, you will be getting paid to be there at the same time. So you're there facilitating the project, you're there putting all the pieces together, putting the puzzle together, and you have your team of consultants and professionals coming out to give you advice on this or that, and you're getting paid to do that organizing. And if you're really in a learning space in your head, if you're really, aware and listening, you are going to learn so much from that process. So then the next thing you can do is, if they're a good match, you can build them into the specialized project. So as you move forward, it's like, wow, this arborist is really great. I learned so much. I think they're going to do a really great job. They'll be my go-to arborist for this project, and I'm going to learn a ton from them. I know my client is going to get really exceptional work because of what a great arborist they are. Win-win for everybody. And so then if you really build these relationships out and you become a contractor, you can start playing the subcontracting game even. And we do this at Permaculture Artisans. We have our chosen team of professionals that we have a really good relationship with. We really trust each other. They work well with our crew and our foremen. And so they come with Permaculture Artisans. Like, the client doesn't have a ton of interaction with these subcontractors. The client is interacting with us. We're managing our subcontractors. And in that way, we actually can build a percentage of profit on that subcontractor's work. So I'll hire out an arborist. Maybe the arborist says, well, it's going to cost $2,000 to work on this tree. And maybe I, sell the client on doing it for $2,500, and we make a $500 profit. Or often that $500 is already going to disappear to overhead costs and insurance costs and all that stuff, but at least you took care of that. And sometimes you may actually make some money. And relationship building is the key to all of this. Hooking up other professionals is a really fabulous way to get jobs yourself. I've got a whole team of professionals we work with over the years, and sometimes they'll call us in on projects. Sometimes we call them in on projects, and it's really so effective to just have that team that you work with that allows you to really build off each other's networks and to hire each other as much as possible. So that's my secret method for getting paid to be trained by masters. I've learned so much from all the masters I've invited out on my projects over the years. And eventually, if you're really good at learning from folks, you don't even need to hire them after you've done a couple projects with them. You can get your own crew trained to do what those masters were doing, and then you can start doing it, providing that service on your own. Now, if you do that, though, still maintain the relationship and invite those folks into projects that are, of a higher scale. So that way you just keep that relationship really sound. Okay, avoid these mistakes and save time, money, and your sanity. Seriously, folks, don't take on too many projects at one time. Check out this comic here. What to do when you're overwhelmed with work. Step 1, make a list of all the things you have to do. Step 2, categorize them based on their importance. Step 3, realize you just made it worse. And hear the woman saying, they're all important. I can't stress enough that setting yourself up for overwhelm, taking on too many projects, I've made this mistake, and it almost almost killed my business when I took on too many big projects. They were too far away from each other. I didn't have the staff to take good care of these projects and these clients. And both of these projects ended up being a disaster. And that's not the kind of word of mouth that you want to have. So really watch out for that. Making poor hires. Don't just hire people because you like them. Don't just hire your friends. Make sure that you have a vetting process for people you're going to hire. If you go into setting up a bigger company, becoming a licensed contractor and having employees and stuff, make sure that you're doing it in a way where you have a good vetting process so you don't get yourself in trouble. I've done this too many times and it is a real blow to the business. Leave projects unresolved. Another great way to destroy your reputation is to leave projects before they're finished, leave them in a bad state, and so on. Not clarifying what billable hours are. Oh, that's a huge mistake I've made for years, which is when I set up a proposal for a client, I don't clarify what a billable hour is. And so then the next day they send me a 20-page email and I'm supposed to spend 3 hours reading it and responding to it. And when I go bill the client for all that time I spent on that email, they throw a fit. Hey, I didn't know that emails were billable. It's like, well, that's 4 hours of my time there. So yeah, it's billable. So really be upfront with that ahead of time so you don't get yourself stuck in a situation where you're giving away tons and tons of your time and feeling resentful about it. Not giving change orders when the scope changes. Oh wow, is this just not maybe the biggest mistake that landscape contractors make, landscape designers make, is that when the scope of the project changes, and it will almost every time, the scope will change. You do not, I repeat, you do not want to just skip over the communication piece on that. If your project is going into a situation where, man, I'm only halfway done and we've already blown 3/4 of the budget, that is not a good place to be. You want to give change orders. You want to be upfront with the client every week if you can, every day if you can, about where you are in the project, how close to the budget are you. Provide change orders. A change order is basically just when you say, okay, the scope changed. Here's what the new estimate's going to be, or it's going to be another $2,000 to finish the project, and here are the reasons why. You need to have that conversation with clients and make those change orders happen in a timely manner. So please remember, give your landscape career a powerful start. Avoid all those mistakes, implement those workflows, and you're going to be successful. So follow the workflow and you'll see amazing results. I never could have built my company without applying this approach, and I really learned the hard way.